I'm Asha Dore with Totally Biased Reviews, and I'm here with my friend Liz to talk about their literary erotica collection, Your Salt on My Lips.
I'm Liz Asch, and I'm a writer, artist, and acupuncturist living in Portland, Oregon. And I'm the author of Your Salt on My Lips, which is a collection of mostly queer literary erotica that we're going to talk about today.
I'm so excited to talk about it. And I read, I guess it was the first edition, is the one that I read. So since you've had three editions, are there any changes to the content across the three?
So the first edition came out with Cleus Press as a ebook only during the pandemic. It came out the summer of 2021. And then I turned that into a print book with their permission and blessing. So the first print book is has a pink cover. It's exactly the same as the ebook. And then the third edition came out in 2023, and that has a gray cover, and that has two extra stories in it, but otherwise it's the same. So it has two stories at the end that were stories I published in magazines that I couldn't publish with Cleus. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it was fun. It was fun to do multiple editions, and the pink one is a limited edition. There's only 500 of them, and then the gray one is unlimited. So yeah, so I have the ebook 2021, the pink book 2022, and the gray book 2023. So this is a book of queer literary erotica that runs the spectrum of gender, sexuality, sensuality, gender presentation, um, and it has an emphasis on wild permission, very clear communication and consent, embodiment, presence, and mindfulness, imagination, and healing. So it's kind of an unusual erotica collection in that way because it's more common for erotica collections to be more focused on like the steamy wild permission side, but not include that other stuff. And it's also more common for them to like just focus on one demographic, like this is lesbian erotica or this is like erotica for gay men. Um, so this one is just like a pansexual feast with a lot of like healing mysticism and um, taboo breaking scenarios, which is why I wanted to write it, because I wanted to focus on my own taboos that I held around sex and sexuality, and try to like challenge myself to write a story that broke or busted into those taboos. So that's kind of why it's like all over the board, is that I was like, maybe I have a little hang up about this thing. Let's see if I can write a story about it. And how fun would that be? And does that free something up inside of me? So I hope it does that for the reader too. Like that was my intention.
I was going to ask you, how you came to write that because, I'm familiar with your writing. I don't know that much about erotica. Like I'm like sort of a noob, but I like your stories. They're interesting to me. And I didn't think like I didn't know that I would because I'm like, why do I really read this stuff? Like, so what is it gonna like be like, But I think that the interesting thing to me is that they're literary too.
Yeah, they're pretty poetic and lyrical, and I play with form. For people listening, Asha and I were so lucky that we took do this low residency MFA program from 2014 to 2016 at Eastern Oregon University. We got to study with Lidia Yuknavitch and Justin Hocking and a bunch of other amazing people. Um, and actually, this book may not have existed if I hadn't taken a class with Lidia the year before our program started, which was called Sex, Death, and Ecstatic States, I think.
Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
ecstatic state, sex, death, and memoir. And I have,
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, it's been amazing because like I've managed to interview like half of that cohort because everybody's got books coming out or recently have come out. It's just like this blossoming of really amazing work from that cohort.
Yeah, Tamim was in that class. I think Tracy Burkholder was like, yeah, a lot of people were in that class. So we were writing like a something about exploring eros, and I wrote this story that's in this book about a young girl's like sexual awakening sitting in a lemon tree. And people in the class, I got really positive feedback on it, and people in the class were like, Liz, you should write erotica. And I was like, oh, really? I don't know. And then that planted the seed. Sorry, bad pun, but it's true. And then that is the seed of this book, really, is the lemon tree story. And then I was like, ooh, maybe I will try writing erotica. And so I started writing some very racy stories, and it was really good for me because I left a marriage. I did a marriage not that long before, and was definitely in a place in my life where I was like trying to reclaim my erotic self because I'd lost it, which is a pattern that I have struggled with throughout my life. Like losing my erotic self, finding it again, claiming it, something happening, losing it again, you know. So that's this book for me is kind of a map of that process. And I hope that it offers the reader that too, that, you know, people can read something in this book and be like, ooh, that like stirs something in me, or that like turns me on in a way I didn't know, or, you know, whether that's something they keep as a kink or an interest, or whether it just awakens something in their body and they move on. I'm really trying to like attune the book to people's sexual essence. You know, that's kind of the point. But anyways, so I started writing erotic stories after the ecstatic states class, and I started submitting them to like anthologies, and I got a few published in Bust magazine. They had this page in the back called the One-Handed Read, which is kind of a cute little title. So I did a few of those with pseudonyms, and I was like, woohoo, like this is really thrilling and fun to like publish smutty things. Because I grew up in the South, and in a family where we didn't talk about sex. And I was always really adamant about talking about sex as a teenager, because I was witnessing the AIDS crisis, and I knew I was queer even though I couldn't tell anybody that. And I felt very passionate about public health and AIDS activism. And that this was in the like 1991 to 4. And so I was very emboldened to speak about safe sex and trying to help destigmatize HIV. Um, but I wasn't having sex. Like I was kind of asexual until I was older. I just didn't have an interest in it myself.
That makes a lot of sense. And I really like the idea of that map. My reaction to hearing that is sort of like, oh, that's like a map that I like might need, but wouldn't have ever thought to look for. You know, I often think about these sort of like TikTok and Instagram type like rhetoric around just like the way that we need to have a relationship with ourselves sexually. And I think that that's it makes sense and it's valid, but I also think it's kind of obscure for most people. It's like, okay, cool, yeah, yep, into that. But like how and with what? And the internet does not provide a lot of nuance in that area. I think if you start to Google,
Yeah.
it's just like often things that will make you just feel a little bit worse.
To be honest, I was worried that I stressed a lot that this book would make people feel worse, because I didn't want people to read this book and be like, oh, this bitch has it all figured out. Because I don't. But I do feel like I'm the practitioner behind the smut. I work with people as an acupuncturist. I have for over 15 years, and I do somatic work with them around sexual trauma, around body dysmorphia and dysphoria and all kinds of things like that. And so I'm very familiar with helping people kind of mend the rifts in their psyche and their emotional self and their body, especially in the pelvis and the heart. So that's kind of like my terrain that I'm working with, even though these are very like irreverent and playful and naughty. I'm still coming at it through that lens of like, we're all these complicated bodies with histories of sexual trauma, with histories of betrayal trauma and challenges off and on throughout our lives with intimacy, with our bodies, with, you know, losing our sensuality, with losing our sexuality. And so I wanted to me, all the ingredients are in there. Like the book is highly sensory because in my training, that's a huge part of being in one's body is having our senses open and awakened and kind of tickled, you know, like all 5 senses or 6 or 7 or however many you feel exist. That's really rich in the book, because that's really a part of us getting to work on those layers where we're mending the relationship between the body, the psyche, the senses, the spirit, all that stuff.
Yeah, that resonates for me a lot. And I remember like the first time that I read it, I was thinking about, some of your guided meditations when I came to you for acupuncture and how these were kind of like, because of the consistency and like your language use, it's kind of like this like sexy guided meditation, which is so cool. And, maybe that's out there and I'm just not aware of it, but it seems like very new to me, like a very novel way of of engaging with, connecting with your own body and that kind of like sense-based meditation stuff.
Yeah, that's for people listening. That's the other thing I do is I have a free podcast called Bodyland, Metaphor or Medicine. The idea being that metaphor or storytelling can be a form of medicine in and of itself. And when we land in our bodies and call them our home, we're so much more grounded and capable and attuned to ourselves. So it's like an archive of like 50 guided visualizations that people can just listen to when they're like on the subway or at home resting. They're definitely not for multitasking. Like you don't listen to them when you're driving or even on a walk. They're for like very quiet, still time with your eyes closed. And there's every season has a different theme, and they range from like 5 to 35 minutes. And I just tell people like just pick a title that calls to your attention. There's no listening in order or anything. And there's a few kind of like lectures thrown in, but it's mostly each one's a visualization. And I do want to do a lot more with that. Like I have a lot of other projects in the works with the guided visualizations, and I might end up doing like a more sexy one. The Bodyland isn't sexy. Well, my girlfriend disagrees, but that's just because she likes my voice. But they're not. They're just like sensual and like healing. They teach you how to do this thing in Chinese medicine that we call qi cultivation, which is to move the energy in your own body. And so they teach you how to do that using your imagination, which is like your superpower. Like we all have this built-in superpower that can help us change the way we feel. It's like the same way that your imagination, when it gets into an anxiety or a worry loop and you start like catastrophizing and inventing some terrible story that you think just happened to your loved one, like you can totally change your physicality. Like you sweat, you flush, you get nervous, your stomach hurts, like your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up. All of that is the impacts on your body of bad storytelling. So the guided visualizations are a way to totally use that same process, but in the other direction, and create good stories that make us feel grounded and like safe, that reintegrate into our psyche a sense of deep belonging to ourself, to our community, to the planet, so that we can rest and trust that we can rest. And so that we're not like caught in that agitated, angsty feeling of like, terrible things are going to happen, or or are happening, or I'm a bad person. And they're very earth-based, so I think of them as eco art or part of this like eco sensuality or eco sexuality movement, because they're really deep in earth imagery, which comes from Taoism, which Chinese medicine, which I practice. And that helps us awaken to a deeper connection to the planet than just living in our mind, which is full of a lot of junk, but our connection to the earth and to each other and the trees and the ocean and the air is like where we can self-regulate. So even if we're not in that natural environment, we can bring it into our body and our senses through our imagination and our memory, because we know what it feels like, or we can imagine what it feels like. And so we're just using the imagination as like this really powerful tool to change the way we feel.
I really love the idea of trusting that we can rest. I think that that's something that is very rarely articulated, but is a huge, especially given like the, massive things that are happening in the world always, but especially since the pandemic, but just like this idea that, resting is just not an automatic thing. It's something that we have to like train ourselves to do. And I also think it's really interesting that you're talking about telling ourselves story to change our state in a positive way, which of course is like that's what meditation is, right? But like I often am noticing that ever since I was a kid, when people would get like riled up about something that happened, and I always wondered like, well, if something that they said made you that mad, what could they say that would make you happy again? Like, can't it go the
Yeah.
other direction? And it seems like most people are like, have a lot of resistance to that. It's like, no,
Yeah.
like I'm in the space of being riled up and my vagus nerve is all wacky and whatever. But I love that like permission to soothe yourself.
It's all language, like all of it's language. Language is like everything, right? Like I love it. It's like, of course, our brains are on the same wavelength. They often are.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, let's use language as like the antidote. And it's not like some Pollyanna story. Like it's actually real and talking specifically to your nervous system, talking specifically to the parts of our body that hold tension and fear. And then, crafting language to attune to that and help change the energetics and change the feelings. Like in this book, there's a story like pretty smack in the middle that is like a somatic healing experience. So it's kind of an anomaly for the book in that it's like really just that one thing. But it's between two people whose relationship is unnamed and their gender identities and sexualities are unnamed. So you don't know, is it like a couple? Is it like a sex worker? Is it a healer? Like, who are these people to each other? It's not said. And I did that throughout the book intentionally to leave a lot of blanks that people could fill in with their own imagination because I didn't want to just speak to like one type of person. And so that's strategic throughout the book that like sometimes gender isn't named, sometimes relationship isn't named, sometimes sexuality isn't. Um, and so in that story, like these people are come together in this very soft way and they build trust through a dialogue. The whole story is a dialogue. And then one person coaches the other person through like an ecologically based guided visualization to help them let go of this terrible thing that happened that's also unnamed because it's so common. And so I think that's pretty innovative in an erotica book. I haven't seen it yet. That being said, I don't read like a ton of erotica either. I just feel compelled to make it.
I think one of my resistance points to erotica is just like all of the labels and all of the, meaning making that comes from when we label these things. It's difficult to like know where you fit. And, I personally don't have a lot of attachment to labels at all. Like I've always struggled with other people's need for them. So like it's permission to just not think in those terms and to just like experience something as like an imaginative body attached to a story is really wonderful. And I do think it's new, though I also have very little experience reading erotica. So
But I guess it is kind of that hybrid thing that you and I are both drawn to. Like,
yeah, just like being able to make like layered meaning without, it's not like without a plot or without like concrete criteria, but just like to make that, I guess, to trust the reader to use their lived experience to layer it with the lyricism so that that is there as
yeah,
they're experiencing it. It's like a collaborative
for
effort.
sure. Yeah, I did that with a number of stories, and throughout the book, I was very conscientious to do that with race and ethnicity of my characters too, because of the erotica that I have read, um, it's it is common to just default to whiteness. I mean, that's
Mhm.
something we struggle with in this society, and I did not want to do that. I didn't want to rely on terms like creamy skin or pink nipples or pink pussy or any of that. I
Mhm.
wanted this book to take place in bodies of the global majority, and I wanted and I didn't want thinness to be a default either. So like when people's bodies are described, they're ethnically diverse and there are curves and there's hair and all that stuff, and there's never like a standardized slim white woman is the love sex object.
Mhm.
So you won't find that in here.
I think that's wonderful and necessary and super inviting.
I came out freshman year of college and I started getting interested in sex and intimacy and romance and found it very thrilling to like pick girls up at bars or like have a orgy with the rugby team or whatever. So I did get really curious about what was out there, and like I remember like the summer of 1994, like sitting on the floor of St. Mark's Bookshop in New York City, like tucked in between the aisles so that I was a little bit hidden, like reading Kathy Acker and just having like my mind blown because it was so sexy and naughty and body and hot. And I was like, people can write like this. So I think it was like Kathy Acker, Annie Sprinkle, who I was really lucky to get to collaborate with last month. It was super fun. And
Oh,
her partner, Beth
cool.
Stevens, they're amazing. Yeah, I know. It was incredible. And like Leslie Feinberg and then the sensual stuff like Jeanette Winterson and Sarah Walters and all the stuff is queer, mostly lesbian. But for me, it was like that was like an awakening. Anais Nin and Marguerite Duras, those are more straight, but more just sexual, sensual feminism. Yeah, that stuff like very much influenced me. But even reading that stuff, I wouldn't have thought, oh, I'm gonna go on to write erotic stories. But
Right.
I do have this ancestor in my family line, although there's some contention if he really is related to us because we don't have genetic proof of the liaison between what we've been told, which is like my great aunts, like their mother. We don't know anything about her, but apparently her cousin or brother was the playwright Shalom Asch, who's also a novelist who I'm named after. But he was like this, I don't know. Now I wonder if he was bisexual. He was this kind of innovative, renegade, rebellious Polish artist in the early 1900s who had a lesbian love scene in his play. And like a beautiful kiss on stage, like the premise of this play he wrote, The God of Vengeance, is that um, this man who's kind of a sort of a poser, I guess, like he's pretending to be like such an upstanding citizen, and he's secretly running a brothel in his house and not treating his wife well. His daughter falls in love with one of the prostitutes in his brothel and they run away together. So it's a really good story of like queer desire and comeuppance for an asshole. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was a really big deal. And like the actors got arrested and anyway, it turned into a Broadway play. But I don't know if he really is my blood ancestor or like more of a spiritual person,
Mhm.
but I really felt like this book came through him through me. Like I felt like an ancestral connection when I was writing it, which was really cool.
That is cool.
Oh, one of the taboos I wanted to break was like familial, like it's sort of incest kind of thing. And I was
Mhm.
like, uh, I thought about sisters and I was like, I don't really want to play with that. But what about a sister-in-law situation where like the brother and husband figure that they had in common has passed away and they have this like latent desire for each other. And so there's this really sexy story that takes place like in an old country shtetl, like a little Jewish village where there's like a lot of imagery of like, you know, like Jewish food comes in, like fruit trees, and it's very like honey, very sexy. I think I probably pissed off some lesbians because there's a recurring story in the book. There's several recurring stories, but there's one where two sort of like frumpy middle-aged lesbians who've been partners for a very long time and have kids and feel kind of run down and overwhelmed by life decide for one of their 50th birthday parties or both their 50th birthday parties that they're gonna like hook up with like a hot young guy together. So that might be something some couples do. It's certainly not something other couples do, but I just wanted to play up that fantasy, like, you know, growing up, like when I came out as a lesbian, and then I lived in Northampton for a while, which was like at the time, I don't know if it still is, like the lesbian capital of the country. Like it felt very taboo to have any sort of bisexual identity at all at that time. It didn't feel acceptable. And, I still sometimes had an interest in men and I've had relationships with men. And yeah, so I just was like, I want to confront this taboo and I want to pick like the frumpiest people. They're not just like sex pots. Real people, but there's a lot of fantasy in the book. There's like some mystical experiences. There's some like nature metaphors. There's sort of like a chrysalis story of like sexual, like a kind of orgasmic, sexual experience and some unknown creature. There's a giant vulva nova, like a pussy in the sky that like gushes off the bad politicians. Like there's just a lot of fun in this book. It's kind of
Amazing.
it was a little bit like let your imagination know no bounds. And then I kind of thought, like, when I pitched it to the press, I assumed they would make me cut out a bunch of stuff. And instead, I got this fantastic editor, Hannah Bennett, who was amazing. And she was like, yeah, let's do it all. And can you add a bunch more stories? And I was like, sure. So I wrote more stories and they included everything. Except the ones that had already been published in the magazines. I don't think the somatic healing experience would have been, I hadn't written it. That wasn't in the original draft I gave them. But as I was shaping the book and writing more stories, it was my hairdresser, Jason, who was like, what if you had like a story coming from a sex worker who's also a healer? And that kind of planted the seed.
I just like love so much of what you're saying. And I think that it's just so necessary because I often wonder, and this is like not quantifiable or nobody could ever know, but just like how many people in the world like never got to have like a really good fuck, like a really good fuck because they just didn't explore outside
Yeah.
of whatever it is that they were told to believe, not like outside of their beliefs. I think women don't talk about that very much. I think that it's like seen as like not important or petty or low, but it's, for a lot of people, I guess other people don't talk about it too, but definitely like in my experience, women, and just this idea of like, what if you're missing something that could be the best thing ever? And like, what if you
Yeah.
just try?
I love that you brought that up. I think like Erica Jong has that book about the zipless fuck or whatever. She's trying to find the perfect fuck.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think that was definitely the impulse behind this book too, is to just be like, can language turn people on to the point that they like unfurl a bit or bloom, like go from a bud to a wider bloom. Um, and if so, like, let me try a whole bunch of different stuff and see what moves you, reader, what gets you in a better spot with yourself. Writing the book kind of did that for me too. I mean, that was sort of the point. I had to come up with a lot of different ways to describe an orgasm because there's 35 stories in here and there's not an orgasm in every single one, but there are a lot.
Mhm.
So I was like doing field research at home. Like, let me see what other way I can describe it. So it was a really fun project because it was like during the pandemic, we were all really isolated and I was like delighted to like get to work on this book. I'd be like, ooh, okay, let me see what other stories I can write tonight.
Mhm.
So it definitely kept me like it healed some stuff in me just writing it for sure.
I bet.
I think this book is kind of like, here are a bunch of very, very dirty stories. You, reader, get to be the voyeur and you get to insert yourself in them as an imagined participant if you want to. And some of them are more voyeuristic and some are more first person or that point of view. And then you get to see like what turns you on. Is it stuff that you already knew about yourself? Is it something else? Does it inspire you to do anything different regarding your own sexuality or intimacy or relationship work? And it's supposed to just be like playful and curious and a little bit healing on the side.
I love that. I think that's amazing. Is there anything else that you want to say about, your book or the process?
Sometimes you kind of hit, just for the writers out there, like sometimes you just strike a chord and you get lucky. Like this book, I pitched it to the one press that I would like to work with, and they took it right away. And that was so thrilling. I have other projects I've been working on for 10 years that I can't find a home for, that I like really want a collaborative editing team and I want like a collaborative publishing experience and I just can't seem to strike it. And so I don't know, I guess just like being open to the kind of unpredictable process of trying to publish one's own work or self-publish it, which is maybe where I'm getting to be. Sometimes it clicks and sometimes it doesn't. And it's not a reflection of you or your work. It's just a very labyrinthine, challenging industry to throw oneself into. I never expected my first book to be erotica. Like, that's not at all the writing career that I had in mind. And I could have published this under a different pseudonym. I don't use the same last name that I use as an acupuncturist because I needed a boundary there. But I yeah, I thought I wrote a book about art and processes of making as ways to like reflect on oneself from when I was a studio assistant in New York in my 20s. And that's the book that I always planned to publish first. So this was a surprise. And it did make me both thrilled and horrified when it came out. I went through like, I feel like publishing the book, I was like, oh, I published a book on how to claim one's erotic self. And in the publication process, I completely shut down my sexuality, lost myself, and like energetically hid in a cave, being like, what have I done? This is the raunchiest book. I can't believe I put my name on it. So I've toggled between feeling like that public health sex advocate who's like, hell yeah, I will talk about anything. Ask me about squirting, ask me about orgasms, ask me about tits. I want to talk about it all. And then this other half of me that's just like, oh my God, I am a shy little Southern girl who never should have opened my mouth. What was I thinking? So yeah, definitely had some like real work to do in the last 3 years since this book came out around my own taboos around sexual sex in public and releasing art about sex to the public. It stirred all that stuff up in me. I am not beyond it.
It's like emotional courage, not like, you're fighting like an actual war, but it's like an emotional courage that I think is, again, just something that we know but we don't talk that much about. It's kind of like, if you like walk up to a writer after they do a reading and talk to them about what you think you know about their life, they tend to act like a frightened animal or get pissed like right off
Yes.
the bat. It's like a fight or flight. You have to like connect these two realities that is uncomfortable, I think. And so it takes a lot to step into those spaces. Have you been able to do any like public readings? Because I know that we were, especially in
Yeah.
Portland, it was like masked in 2021. So
Oh yeah. I had like a party in my backyard and I read a story to my friends, and then I learned the hard way that I do not like reading the stories in my book that have what I call onomatopoeia orgasms. That is a little too theatrical for me, even though I love theater and used to be involved in it. I don't feel comfortable doing that. So now I read stories that don't have um, orgasms that I have to act out.
that is a
uh,
valid point.
yeah, there's a lot of them in here, and sometimes they strike like a cobra, like at the end of the story, and I'm like, don't read that one next time. So, um, yeah, so I have done some events. It's been lovely to celebrate the book. I haven't done as much as I would have if I wasn't battling my two selves.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I'm sure that COVID didn't help either. I mean, it was like 2021 was
Yeah,
like
for sure.
almost worse than 2020 in a lot of, especially I feel like in the Pacific Northwest, like the world started opening up, but we kind of got, I felt like we kind
Yeah,
of hermited like hard that year. It was strange up
yeah,
here.
we did.
Do you want to read something from it here?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is called The Licked Chrysalis. Mouth to mouth, we become something other than ourselves. Your tongue enters this wet cavern of mine, like taffy stretching and stretching. It is its own creature, like the proboscis of some insect. I feel it snaking under my palate, dodging my uvula, shimmying down my throat. I'm moaning and creaming my shorts, held captive by its muscular allure. It has a mind of its own, savage. I can feel the willful muscle of your tongue rim my heart with a sultry lick as it shimmies down my gullet. I shiver with nipple rising pleasure. I feel faint. How have I not fallen down? Some other mythical presence must be holding me up. Ah, yes, I feel it, like fingers on my rib cage. I have sunk into a standing chair. Does my spine work? I can't feel my legs. My skin starts to itch and I break out in a sweat. My vision has gone blurry. Oh, now it's turning kaleidoscopic. Everything is a mandala shimmering with light. My shoulders feel bubbly, like something is starting to prickle beneath my skin. A crinkly sound surrounds me, echoes in a cave. What is this ecstasy? Your tongue rolls through me like a cunning creature, romancing my insides, crepuscular. It becomes even more alive within me, a seductress in the dark, slipping around my hip bones, trickling down my legs to graze the arches of my feet. It's sucking on the inside of my toes. Oh, my word. Your tongue is filling me with some kind of potion. This slick, wet muscle is exuding a chemical as it explores my insides with its sensual charm. I'm under a spell. My vision is prismatic. I see bursts of light and geometric patterns shimmering with rainbows. I feel lit with color inside, dazzling rays of bliss. My organs are being fondled, caressed, and rearranged, dripping with this pheromonic mystery. There is no part of me left untouched by your slim, long tongue. Its nature is playful and more sensual than anything I've ever felt. What's this? Your tongue is now coiling in my pelvis. I feel it sliding like a serpent around and around. Oh, I feel it licking my G spot from the inside. Oh, I can't. I've never. I'm gushing. This flood, the licking. The gland feels so fast. It's bulging, bulging, brimming. I'm flooding again. My pelvis is drowning, lost in a sea of my own juices. Antenna burst from my forehead. My mouth sprouts its own sticky tongue. There's that otherworldly feeling again, the tongue licking me inside out, and I'm filling, full, bursting, dissolving. Idyllic quest. I am lost. I am lost in it. I am bright. I am electric. I am born.